he owns a cybersecurity company called Secure Success, right? You told me some pretty incredible stories. Some of the things were unsettling to hear, but they're necessary. As a parent of 6 young children, I feel like parents need to hear a lot of the stuff that you've told me. First, I want to start with the story that you told me when someone sat in front of someone else's house. And I want to start with that because this is kind of the entire purpose of cybersecurity.
Yes.
When you first came to my house, you were like, oh, I see that monitor on your wall. I could crack into your stuff right there. Oh, I see that laptop open. I could crack into your stuff right there. I'm like, what? I had no idea that you can have your personal information infiltrated and not even know it. So tell me that story of what happened.
Yeah. So this happened. Oh God, I don't know. It has to have been at least eight or so years ago now. But what happened was this guy was arrested for downloading child exploitation material or some child pornography, essentially. And so the FBI was able to trace that these downloads were going to this certain IP address, and then they were able to go with a search warrant to the internet service provider and say, who has this IP address at this time? And they said, okay, that belonged to this individual, and he lives at this address, or this is the billing address, right? So then they go and they bust down his door with a search warrant. They take all his computers, they arrest him. And then
That's super traumatic.
and it had to be. It was this wonderful man and his wife were their lives were just completely disrupted by this. And he claimed, he's like, it was not me. I did not do that. I've never done that before. That's not me. I don't do that. And so they looked through his computers and they didn't find anything. They found no evidence of this.
And they probably had his phone as well.
They had his phone. They took everything, every piece of electronic storage, anything that was in his house. They took it and they searched it. They couldn't find anything. But for whatever reason, the police decided to still push forward with charges on this man. And so that's when we were hired to try and see if we could help him and his lawyers with his defense. And what we ended up finding out was we were like, okay, well, what does your Wi-Fi look like? And we come to find out it was like hardly any security on his Wi-Fi.
Oh, man.
And so I was then hired to pretty much kind of do a proof of concept of how easy it would be to hack his Wi-Fi. And so I drove up to his house, sat out in my truck outside of his home, and I was able to, within minutes, hack his Wi-Fi because
that's how easy it is.
His Wi-Fi was just his phone number. That's what his password was his phone number. And I didn't know his phone number, right? I did all my contacting with his lawyers. I never spoke to him on directly with his phone, and so I didn't know his phone number, and I was able to minutes I was in. Because it's just that simple when the password is that weak. And so we were like, okay, there's definitely some reasonable doubt here. There's no evidence that he did this on anything he owns. And look how easy it was for me to crack his password. Anybody could have driven up to his home, hacked his Wi-Fi, downloaded that stuff, and driven away. And the reason why it was such a scary case, in my opinion, is because the police at that time were kind of trying to tie an IP address to the person that was paying the bill.
Yeah.
And so it was like, in our mind, we kept asking them, we're like, well, why aren't you going after the wife? Why are you going after him? What evidence do you have that it's him and not anybody else?
Interesting.
And that's the hardest part of the subset in cybersecurity of digital forensics is placing the suspect behind the keyboard. Yeah. You can say, yeah, this computer did it, but who was at that computer when it happened? And so eventually the case was dropped because there was no way to prove that he did this. In my mind, I 100% do not believe that he was the man that did that. And I'm so grateful to have been involved in that case, to be able to try and help him with that. But it just goes to show how important it is to make sure you have such good cybersecurity in place for your home, to protect your home, because you never know who's gonna who's gonna sit outside and hack your Wi-Fi and download something, and then the FBI comes and busts down your door and takes you to jail?
with you as an expert on this subject, where are people most vulnerable? Is it their phones, their computer, or something like that, where someone drives up to your house, your Wi-Fi?
I think a lot of people don't protect their Wi-Fi good enough because they think, oh, I'm just gonna share my Wi-Fi with anyone that walks through the door anyway. So what does it matter? And they don't think about that. They don't think, well, someone's gonna use my Wi-Fi to do something illegal, and then it's gonna look like I did it. It just doesn't go through people's minds, and I don't blame them, right? Who's gonna think of that? But it's something that unfortunately we do need to think about.
Especially with all this AI stuff that's happening. And then, okay, so most parents in America right now are kind of freaking out a little bit after seeing Sound of Freedom and thinking about how are we going to protect our kids. I know that you personally, from talking to you before, have experienced some really uncomfortable things being in the industry that you're in. And before we started this, you were talking about how the beginning of that movie triggered some memories for you. Do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, in what I did, I worked in criminal defense cases that oftentimes would involve some child pornography. I also assisted the police in a lot of stuff. And then what's crazy is you just find it on people's computers. We would be involved in a case that had nothing to do with pornography, nothing to do with child pornography, and we would just find it because of how prevalent it is.
And you'd have to report that.
And then immediately it's like we had a policy at work where if you ever found it, if you ever came across it, it was stop everything. Don't click anything else. Get up, go get someone else, get them to come over and confirm that that is, because sometimes it's kind of questionable. It's kind of awful to think about, but it's like, okay, is this person 12 or is this person 22? And so, and that happened oftentimes where it'd be like, okay, before I go really clicking and diving into this a little bit more, let's get someone else here with me so that we can talk about this as we figure out if we think this is child pornography. But anyway, if we then decide that it was child porn, it was like, okay, we call the local police department. They knew who we were. We had a really great relationship. They would come and take the evidence away, and then that's it. We were done because we're not police officers.
Yeah.
We weren't. But oftentimes, because of what we did, we also got involved with missing children cases and assisting parents in locating their kids when they would disappear. Oftentimes runaways and so forth. But one case in particular I will never forget. We were working on this girl that had disappeared, and she was, we found out once the parents tried to get the police to look at her computer, but they were in a small town. The police didn't have the capability. The local police department didn't have the capability. So they send us the computer. And so we have the computer. We're looking through it as part of our giving back. We weren't charging for it. And we came across Skype messages. It kind of dates how long ago this was. But anyway, we come across some Skype messages between her and this person. And all the conversations that he was having with her, he would send her videos, and we were able to watch these videos and listen to these videos. And it was just some of the most disturbing stuff that you would ever hear.
How old was the girl?
She was 12 years old.
12, you said, yeah.
12 years old. And so she was gone at that point. Her parents, of course, had reported her missing and were working with us. We were able to pull his IP address out of all of that information. Of course, he was sending his videos of himself, so we sent the IP address and screenshots of his face. And they were able to immediately figure out who he was and went and found that girl. And she was locked up in his basement. He had done some horrible things to her.
She was locked up in his basement?
Locked up in his basement, and they were able to go and rescue her from this horrible situation. And the police said, if you guys had not, we would have never found her.
That's so rewarding.
If you guys hadn't, I will never forget that case because it was just like, yeah, we literally were part of saving that girl's life.
Poor girl.
The police said that he would have probably killed her within days.
The more they found out about this guy, they
were like, he was a prior offender. He was out on probation.
What do we as parents do to protect our kids? I mean, you hear this so many times about these kids. They start these little conversations with someone, and here's a better question. What do you think about phones with kids?
Phones is a scary thing for me because I've seen so much crap, right? And I have kids. I have teenage girls. My boy is going to be a teenager here soon, and so we kept coming across this, like, what are we going to do for phones? And so I am a strong believer in trying to teach kids internet safety. I
Yeah.
think that is first and foremost before you ever give access to the internet to any child. You need to teach them how to use it responsibly
Yeah.
and teach them of the dangers that are out there. And then I think that it's lock down that phone so that I just me personally,
Yeah.
we don't give our teenagers access directly on their phones to social media. It just
Good for you.
that's a no-go.
Yeah.
If they want to have a social media account, they can have it on my phone, and they
Yeah.
can come get my phone, and they
Yeah.
can use my phone to
That's so
use their
smart.
social media, and that's totally fine. Because what are we going to do when they turn 18?
Yeah.
So we got to teach them how to use it responsibly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that it's so critical to monitor, because you never know what's going to happen. There's going to be people that try and come after them. There's so many things you can look them up of people who create a fake profile for a 13-year-old girl, and they're like, how long is it going to take for someone to try and start talking to them? And it's minutes after a brand new account on Instagram shows up for a 13-year-old girl, and there's already people trying to talk to her.
That is so unbelievable. I remember, I mean, most people have seen this video where it shows like, someone pretending to be a young girl and how quickly it is that people will come on and act, like they're just a nice guy who wants to meet up with them, but they're like some 40-year-old guy in his basement. But I actually saw this live. I don't know if you know the Maloof Foundation. I think we talked a little bit about them, but we went to one of their seminars one time, and they had an expert there along with the police officer who specializes in this. And they said, let's make up a fake account. So they put the big screen up, had it connected to his phone, so the whole audience is watching this, and I think they made her age like 13 or something, and put up a new profile. It was 8 seconds, 8 seconds after this posted, that she was starting to get messages from these men. And so this police officer who's posing as this little girl, and he's an expert in this now, so he knows, like, you put a smiley face at this time, you put this emoji, you don't want to sound like an adult. And so they're trying to, get these guys. And this is just within like a 25-mile radius. That the phone was blowing up. And within under like 5 minutes, there's already, nasty stuff. And sure enough, like we watched over this progression, there was already a meetup place and time. Just in this little setting, there's already a meetup place and time with this little girl. And she says on there over and over, are you sure you're okay that I'm only 13? And yeah, no, that's totally fine. We can just meet up. And hey, do you like to do this? Do you like to do that? I was sick watching this. I can't believe that this sort of stuff happens. And sure enough, they sent the police. There was a meetup place right there at the point of the mountain, and he was there waiting and got arrested. This is in our own neighborhood. It's in everyone's neighborhood. I can't believe this stuff happens, but this is why cybersecurity is so important. And like you said, teaching our kids. So on that note, I know you've seen some disturbing stuff. And what is your take on pornography?
I think pornography is pure evil. I don't pull any punches with that. I think pornography is just awful. It's filth.
Do you think it could ever help a marriage watching?
No, I don't. I don't think so. And that's an opinion, but I just don't think that's something that could help you spice up your sex life or anything. No, absolutely not. All it's going to do is tear you down and cause just awful things to happen within your own mind.
There's this, back in the day, it was like Dateline or 2020 or something. They interviewed several people on death row, and they had a couple things in common. And two of the main themes that they found over and over with every single one of them was that the first thing they did was look at pornography and then got addicted to it and then hurt animals, which is interesting too. I had no idea that was connected. But the very first thing was pornography. In fact, even Ted Bundy, he talks about that. That was the very first thing he got into was pornography. It is so evil and so gripping. And then you look at, like when I look at things like Sound of Freedom or you hear about these child pornography cases, I'm so disgusted and I almost feel naive because I'm like, why would anyone want to watch that? But the more I've, listened to experts talk about this, they say because once you start looking at pornography enough, you're bored with normal sex. You start looking at weirder and younger ages and different genders and, the weirder the better. And so that's how people start going down this dark path. And there's nothing as insidious as hurting a child that way. I remember you telling me that you came across a lot of child pornography on people's laptops. Sometimes it would be like a wife. Tell me about that. Wouldn't a wife
Yeah.
like give you an assignment?
So there was a lot of times we would end up with cases where this wife and mother would come in and be like, I think my husband is looking at pornography. He's changed recently. He's been dealing with pornography for a long time, but things just feel worse, and I'm afraid that it has progressed, and that he is now looking at some child pornography.
So these wives
or
could
other
feel
things.
it.
They can feel it. They can tell, and so it was our job to essentially just sort through these guys' porn collections and their habits and so forth, and try and find it. And there were some cases where it was like, yep, your hunch was right, and there were other cases where we were like, no, he hasn't got there yet, but keep supporting him,
Yeah.
and so forth. And there were other cases where it was like like I said, we were not even involved on a pornography level, and it would just, in all the years of me looking at any devices, I can count on one hand the number of devices that I actually personally analyzed that did not have a piece of pornography on it.
It's that prevalent.
It's that prevalent. It's everywhere. It's everywhere, and it's seeking out our
disappointing.
kids. It's
Yeah.
seeking out our kids, and that's why I say, like, monitoring your kids' devices. If you're going to give them a laptop or give them a cell phone, I think a wonderful tool that I think is out there, available and affordable. It's called Bark, and
yeah.
you can put that on their phone, and it's not only just like looking for them, like looking for those sexual words or anything like that, but like, kids are creative, and they come up with these combinations of emojis and stuff like that mean things.
Yeah.
And it knows these things as well, and so it will alert on if they see these emojis. If it sees these emojis that they know the lingo of,
Yeah.
of younger kids, then we'll get an alert. And it's more than just pornography. It will look for medically concerning things, if someone's talking about suicide, if they're talking about violence or anything like that. And so I'll never forget one time we got an alert, and it was for the headline of the alert said medically concerning. I was like, what does that even mean? And so we click on it, and someone had sent our daughter a picture of a severed hand. And we were like, what? And it had upset her so much, but she had never said anything to us. So it was a great opportunity for us to be able to go and comfort her in something that she was just so disturbed by, but just didn't bring up, because sometimes kids just don't talk about things. They're just like, oh yeah, that happened, and whatever, I'll move on and deal with it, just like I think any of us do.
Yeah.
Right. But we were able to help her process that a little bit more because we were aware of it.
So what signs do you think parents, I mean, I guess, what signs do parents look for to notice that there's an actual issue going on with their child, or some sort of addiction, or I don't know.
I think kids are so good at hiding things from their parents. So good
Tell
at
me
it.
that.
I mean, I think about it when I was a kid.
want them to stay young
I,
and
I
innocent.
think about it, and I feel like I was a pretty good kid, but I hid things from my parents. I think everyone does.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone does, right? And so that's why, again, I think I keep beating this drum of monitoring. I think monitoring is just so important, so that we can find out if they're trying to hide something from us.
Yeah.
So
you told me one time, I've always wondered this too, when you have these, psychologists and police officers and people in your line of work that have to look through disgusting pornography and things like that, how do you keep yourself safe from that? You told me one time a really cool story. Do you mind sharing that?
yeah. So my dad was actually involved in this work quite a bit before I was, and it's actually how I kind of got interested in doing digital forensics. And he was working for the police at the time, and he was seeing a lot of this stuff too. And so he gave me a blessing that I'll never.
Can you explain what that
forget.
is?
Yeah. So
Sorry.
a blessing is he laid his hands on my head, and he said essentially a special prayer, and that blessing, that prayer, was for me to get through what I'm doing, but not remember it. And so I'm so grateful for that blessing. I can recall things if I need to, if I need to remember something or whatever, but like it doesn't haunt me.
That's
Like I
so
know
good.
that it has several of my coworkers and colleagues.
Ugh.
There's an there's an article out there that anyone who's ever interested in doing computer forensic work, I always tell them, before you even dive into thinking about doing this, you need to read this article. And this article talks about how every forensic analyst that is involved in that type of work will get to a point where they will either essentially die inside and become numb to it, or they will put their hands on their desk and push themselves away from the keyboard and say, I just can't do this anymore.
Wow.
And it's so true. It's so true. And I'm so grateful for that blessing that my dad gave me, that allowed me to continue to do that work, because it's so important, I think.
Yes.
But also I got to a point where I kind of couldn't handle it anymore either. And that's why I really chose to pivot a lot of my career towards cybersecurity and less towards the analysis of stuff like that. Because it's just, it's soul wrenching. It really is.
Yes. And thank you for doing that too, because that ends up protecting children, and as much as of that as we can eliminate, the better.
Yeah.
Last night we were out to dinner, and someone there has not seen the movie yet, but we were describing it to them, Sound of Freedom, and they said, I mean, do you really think that there are people who look at child pornography? And this is someone I know and love. It's actually a family member, and he doesn't read the news. He's not on social media. He doesn't like to be involved in any of that stuff. And so I was like, oh yeah, for sure there are people that do that. And he said, no, it's got to be like few and far between. And he didn't believe even half the stuff we were saying. He's like, that's got to be grossly exaggerated. You really think there are children being trafficked? Do you really think so? And having been in this line of work, how real do you think those statistics are, and that message is from that movie? How real do you think that is? Do you think it's actually happening?
Yes, 1000%. I believe it. I know it. Like, there's no question in my mind that stuff happens. I've unfortunately seen some of that material in what I've done, and it's awful and filthy. And you look at it and you're like, what? Why would anyone want to look at this? What kind of monster would put a kid through this to then even create this? And it's sadly real. It is. It's real.
Is it as pervasive?
Mm-hmm. I
as
think
they're
so.
saying?
Yeah. I never worked full time as a police officer actually doing computer forensics.
Yeah.
I worked in the private sector.
Yeah.
But I worked with a lot of police officers that's what they did. They worked in the computer forensic lab as a police officer, and that's all they do. And it is backed up for months because there's so much work that they can't even keep up with it.
That's so disgusting.
There's so much of it that the police can't even keep up. That's why we were volunteering so much, to be able to try and help with these kids, because the computer forensic crime labs are so backed up that they were like, okay, this little town, they could take that computer and they have the resources to send it to the FBI because they don't have a crime lab locally, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, but we can get support from the FBI. But if they had sent that computer to the FBI, it would have been at least a year before they got to it, because they're so backed up with all this other garbage of child exploitation material and child pornography that it would have taken them that long. And that's why we volunteered, and we said, okay, rather than sending it to the FBI, just send it to us. Like, we know what we're doing. Here's all our credentials. My partner actually worked for the FBI for a while doing computer forensics, and so it was like, we know what we're doing. We're not going to ruin the evidence. We know how to handle the evidence properly. Let us take a look at this and help you find your kid.
Well, thank you so much for doing that. Like, that's so needed, and I'm so grateful that people are willing to do that to help. Mm-hmm. On kind of a different note of cybersecurity, there's a lot of people who are having money stolen from them. Mm-hmm. And we talked about my neighbor.
Yeah.
I know you are being interviewed, or were just interviewed by a local news station here on this, but we have a neighbor who just, like, a month and a half ago this happened. He gets a call, the dad gets a call, and it's someone saying, we have your wife and daughter. And there's always that, if you were to hear that, you would have this tinge of, kind of being scared, but then you'd also be like, yeah, right, no, you don't.
Yeah.
And so he said, we'll put them on the phone then. And his daughter got on the phone and said, Daddy, help me, please. I don't know what to do. Help me. And so he just lost it, freaks out, stays on the phone, which I think you said was his first mistake. Like, go, check on, with a text message or something else to see if that's actually them. because with AI, you can do anything right now. So long story short, what happened was he hears his daughter saying a few different things on the phone, but they're like, we're not going to let you talk to her anymore. And so he goes to the bank and gets out thousands and thousands of dollars and sends it to these people in Mexico. He didn't realize he was sending it to Mexico, but sent it to these people in Mexico. And come to find out, they had a Google Home device in his daughter's room. And a few weeks or a few months prior to that, she was really sick and throwing up and said, Daddy, come help me. I don't know what to do. And they had taken that soundbite and used it. And he'd forgotten about, he wouldn't have thought like, oh, they're recording every word on my Google Home device. So he heard his daughter's actual voice saying, Daddy, come help me. I don't know what to do. And they took that soundbite and used it. And so he ended up losing thousands of dollars, and then calls his wife and daughter after that. I can't remember why, but called their phone and they're like, no, we're fine. What's going on? And they had just been at home, but he, wasn't at home. He was out driving and didn't want to get off the phone because he's thinking, I need to do whatever they say or they're going to hurt my daughter. And so AI is getting pretty scary. And this is a neighbor. This is like right here. This is not some story I heard of on TikTok or something. This is an actual neighbor who sent out a message, an email to all of our neighbors telling us what had happened.
The thing about it is it's so easy to be able to clone someone's voice now. You can feed these AI tools someone's voice and it will copy it very, very well. Very well.
Do you, with your company, have something that helps to protect against that?
What I do is I try and educate people and consult with them on that. So my big thing with that is I tell people before anything like that happens, set up it's kind of crazy to think about it. We're going back to old school spycraft type stuff.
Yeah.
But set up like a secret passphrase or a safe word with your family. So that you can say, okay, if it's really you and you need to prove to me that it's you, you say this thing, and this thing is never written down. This thing is never sent in a text message, nothing. And if you hear that word, you are talking to that person. Yeah, so we go in and we'll help consult with them on making sure that we set proper protections on their Wi-Fi, stuff like that. We're gonna look over configurations of all of your devices to make sure that you don't have anything open and accessible in ways that's going to leak your privacy or leak anything out that shouldn't. We do all sorts of testing against your home network because an attacker is going to come in through the outside, and they're going to essentially, figuratively knock on your door, but they're going to knock on the door of your network, right? And so we come and knock on your network's door and see if it will open for us, just like an attacker would. So we'll test that way. A big thing too is just trying to help reduce your digital footprint.
That's great. And tell us the name of your company again.
Secured Success.
Secured Success. And if someone wanted to reach out to you, they would just go to your website or?
Yeah, my website, it's just richardrhickman.com. It's just my name.
richardrhickman.com.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for all this useful information and for the volunteer work that you've done too.
Yeah, of course.